Good to go?
Yep.
All right. Oh, okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Today we have Why Hunt? So we're going to be going over the most intro version of Why Hunt. So we do a lot of 101 when we talk about different species, and now we're taking a step back and just looking at hunting in general and going over kind of the pros of why we hunt as hunters. Is that good, or you want to retake it? No.
We can retake that real
Can you
quick.
guys hear my cat and my dog walking around?
I did not know.
I didn't.
Okay, just making sure. There's a flock of blackbirds outside, and also my bird upstairs. Can you hear that chirping?
Occasionally, but no big deal.
All right, sorry.
Birds are, that's natural.
Yeah.
It's no biggie.
Cool. There you go. Well, I can't see me on my thing. All right, ready? Here we go.
Yep.
All right, welcome today, everybody. Today we're going to be going over why hunt. So we're going to be doing a general intro into hunting and going over a little bit of the history, but then going into how hunters are conservationists and then the different reasons why people hunt and really just all the pros of hunting in North America.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion, especially because, just us three here, when we talk amongst ourselves, we all have different reasons for, why we hunt in general, but also why we target some of the species that we target. And so I think this will be kind of a really cool conversation just to, share some of our thoughts, share what we've learned from, working with a lot of new hunters as well as existing hunters, and should be a fun conversation.
Yeah, and then there's some quick webinar reminders before we get started. Your microphones and webcams are disabled, so sit back and enjoy the information as we get through it. If you do have any questions or want to comment, we have a Q&A window that you can submit your questions through. We will answer those either in the Q&A window, we'll type back to you, or we'll answer them live. And we also have a chat, so if you'd like to communicate amongst yourselves or with us, you can talk back and forth through the chat window as well. And for those people registered for this webinar, you'll receive a copy of this PowerPoint, as well as a link to a YouTube recording of the webinar and a feedback survey. So please fill those out and get them back to us. Our presenters today are going to be Curtis Twellman, Dan Stevens.
Good afternoon.
And myself, Jason Buckley. So to get started today, I think Curtis is going to lead us off.
All right, North American model of wildlife conservation. So this right here is, I don't know if you want to call it the Declaration of Independence for conservationists or something along those lines, but that's kind of what it is. And this kind of lays out the way wildlife management and conservation is done in North America. And we should point out this is an extremely successful system, so much so that other countries like Australia and Africa have started to sort of copy this mold because it is so successful. And let's just look through here. Wildlife is a public trust resource. What does that mean? Well, it means that nobody owns it. Okay, if you go back to the old world in England, you talk about the king's deer. Landowners would own the wildlife that is on that land. But here in North America, that's not the case. Every single person, every citizen in North America has an equal share and stake in wildlife, and that allows us to, to hunt. We have public land to hunt, and nobody owns them. They're not livestock. Awesome. The elimination of markets for game. In the past, there was a well-developed wild game market where you could go and buy deer and bison and ducks and geese and all that sort of thing. And that is not the case anymore here in North America. In other countries, you can still do that. Now, you might say that you see deer occasionally at your supermarket. We do have some agricultural deer, and they fall outside the wild game laws. So that's what you see there. Now, wildlife can only be killed for a legitimate purpose. That's a good question. What's a legitimate purpose? Well, anytime you're using resources from that animal, whether that's meat for food or fur for warmth or Also, legitimate purposes would be any time that the wildlife poses a threat to your property. So if you've got chickens outside and you've got a raccoon that is taking those chickens, then that's considered a legitimate purpose to go ahead and take that raccoon. Wildlife is considered an international resource, meaning it's not just set to the USA. And think about the migratory species that we have, like ducks. You know, we have northern pintail that fly from potentially northern Alaska over the entirety of Canada and then wind up in Louisiana, you know, destination. So some of them even go into Mexico. So they may be crossing multiple countries, multiple geographic boundaries that they know nothing about. International resource makes sense. And then science is the tool for discharge and management of wildlife policy, meaning the proper thing is not to just use your feelings, or it's not to go according to politics, votes. It should be science. You know, it should be rooted in fact. And hunting is a democracy, so the few are protected from the many, and everybody has a say in kind of how it goes down. And this this model has been very successful. We've talked about it. We're going to talk about it throughout this whole thing, but just kind of keep all of these tenets in mind as we go through here. And you can sort of see how in the early days when they crafted all this stuff out, it was so good because it covered all the bases. They got a funding mechanism. They created a workforce to care about natural resources and conservation, and the whole 9 yards. It just works wonderfully. So right now we consider it the era of conservation. We're going to say this period started in the early 1900s. We talk about the Pittman-Robertson Act that was in 1937, but there was a lot of different conservation-minded acts and things going on at this time. So this is when thoughts begin to shift. Before that, we call it the era of extermination, which is kind of a black eye and as far as natural resources are concerned in North America, because after European settlement, basically either people thought that resources were a nuisance or infinite. So they had no reason to regulate any kind of take. They didn't need a reason. If you were bored, you could just hop on a train, I guess, and go and shoot buffalo until your shoulder wants to fall off from, you know, flinging loads. So absolutely no regulation. People often think of things like the passenger pigeon becoming extinct due to hunting, but really we should call that what it was. It was market hunting. It was killing. It was a farmer having a whole bunch of a roost colony on his land and going up there at night and just shooting into it. You know, this was indiscriminate killing. And it's important that we make a distinction that since the start of the modern era of conservation, this has been extremely successful, and we haven't had instances like the passenger pigeon since then. And in fact, animals like white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, elk, black bear, and waterfowl all had significant population declines during this era of extermination. And we're going to talk about it soon, but a lot of these species have had amazing rebounds in present day.
And what I find really intriguing about this kind of concept of this era of conservation is that it was really grassroots led. You know, there was obviously some policy changes that came through, but a lot of those even policy changes were stemming from sportsmen. You know, they started to see that their local populations that they were hunting were just being drastically reduced. And I want to kind of emphasize the passenger pigeon a little bit. If you look at some of the historical writing from, you know, this period that talk about the passenger pigeon, they're talking about flocks that were miles wide and maybe tens to 20 miles long, just an incredible amount of birds. And they were pretty much wiped completely off the map to the point that they're now extinct. So it's really intriguing to see how beneficial this era of conservation is, because we as humans can really decimate wildlife populations and really push them to the brink of extinction, and oftentimes even push them beyond that. But like Curtis said, we want to really emphasize that all of this was pre-regulated hunting.
Yeah, we should go ahead and tackle some of the common misconceptions. So, these aren't all the ones that we hear, but these are definitely some of the most common ones we hear, that hunters are only after trophies. And I think a lot of this stems from social media, and we're all kind of at fault. Think about it. We go out hunting, we have a successful hunt, we take a picture with the animal, we post it, we're excited, but then that's all we post. And so that's all that non-hunters see basically is the pictures of the animal. And I think it goes a step beyond if you can sort of add in pictures of the processing, pictures of the post-processing, have a picture there that shows all of your meat and the haul that you got from that deer, and it tells the whole story. But so yeah, I think all hunters have been at fault here, but non-hunting people, they only see the picture of the trophy, so that's all they think that hunting is. You go out and shoot something big, take a few pictures, and then you just throw it in a ditch and shoot something else. Now we know that not to be the case, but that is certainly a common misconception that I think a lot of us have heard.
Sure.
Also,
And I kind of want to expand on that and provide a little kind of real time example of this. And may remember probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point, there was a big, portion of Facebook hunters that there was at a time you could use like various Facebook profile photos and like join into some kind of mission statement or put like a logo of a sports team over it. Well, some of these and anti-hunting groups started to utilize that feature, and what they found is hunters would automatically, it just became this kind of social storm where once one person did it, everyone saw that, and now they had a bunch of these quote unquote trophy style hunting photos blasted with the PETA logo, right underneath it. And it was just this really interesting way that they utilized, social media to spread their message, against hunting. So just kind of a quick kind of real life example of what Curtis was kind of hinting at there.
sure, and we all got to remember that social media is a powerful tool. Picture's worth 1,000 words, but it might be a different 1,000 words to everybody. So that picture is going to look a whole lot different to somebody who's a non-hunter as it might look to you and your friends. So go ahead and just give them a whole picture story. Show them the meat that you get, show them hanging out with your friends and your family. And then I think folks will get a much better appreciation for what hunting really is. It's not just a trophy. We just take that picture because it looks nice, but then the
Sure.
real work starts. So,
And just to kind of expand on that, there was a recent survey, I think it was the American Community Survey, but they actually assessed what portion of adults in America support hunting. It was about 77 to 80% of your typical adult American supports hunting for conservation and for food. Those are the people that we really need to keep on our side. That's the vast majority of the population. In terms of an overall percentage, we as hunters are less than 2% of the population in this country. And so maintaining that strong support from the masses, which already inherently support hunting, is very important.
absolutely, absolutely. And we already talked about this a little bit, but people think that hunters drive populations to extinction. They'll commonly bring up passenger pigeon, the bison that almost was driven to extinction, Labrador duck, heathhen, I can go on and on. All of those are from the era of extermination. Regulated hunting has never led to a species becoming endangered or extinct. That's an important point to remember, and it's one that a lot of hunters know like the back of their hand. But if you're not in that circle, that might be news to you because you might think, how is it different now than it was in 1850? Well, it's a lot different. Another common thing is that hunting is unsafe and that hunters don't care for non-game species and they negatively impact habitat. All three of those are incredibly false. Hunters we see, and not just us three here that are all like have wildlife degrees and all this, but hunters in general have a deep appreciation for the natural world. And maybe they don't know the scientific name of all the plants or birds and all that stuff, but they sure know a name for it. And they know what time of the year it's out and what time of the year it's not out, and they know where it should be and where it shouldn't be, which makes them incredible stewards of the natural land and incredible resources for wildlife managers and conservation officers alike, because they're sentinels out there watching the wildlife day in and day out, which is a great resource. And hunting is generally considered one of the more safe, like after school things you can do, extracurricular activities, anything you want to say, pitted against any sport you can imagine. And the statistics look pretty good for hunting. So safety is paramount for hunters. You have to take a hunter safety course. And, we basically drill it into everybody in every one of our workshops, safety first all the time. And habitat and even non-game species, they're all important, and hunters care about that stuff. So what impact do hunters really have? I said it again, or I said it once, I'm going to say it again. Regulated hunting and trapping has never led to a species becoming endangered or extinct. It's a fact. Regulated hunting works when science is used to allocate permits or season length, or however the wildlife management is structured. When science is used for that, it works extremely well. Also, hunters are the primary economic driver of wildlife conservation. So not only do they care about it, but they're the primary economic driver. They're the ones buying the duck stamps, buying the hunting license, and paying in excise tax like the Pittman-Robertson Act that we'll talk about here in a bit. All that money funds conservation, not just for game species, but then also all the non-game species that benefit from that. A great example is wetlands that Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl have done an amazing job at. Waterfowl's doing wonderfully, and there's several shorebirds that are not game species at all, but they've benefited from those same habitats. So really great. Now we need to get to work on the grasslands. That's the next thing, but Pheasants Forever and groups like that are already on it, so they're in good hands. But yeah, hunters have a deep respect for the natural world. That's part of the driving factor that gets them out there. So even if they don't know all the correct names, they're often on a sort of a naturalist pursuit to learn it. They're a student of nature, like people in academia are a student to whatever their major is. They're going out there and they're either writing stuff in their journal or they're keeping mental notes. But most of the time you see somebody who's been walking in the woods hunting for a long time, they're just an absolute wealth of knowledge, not just about the species they go after, but the trees, the mushrooms, the plants, you name it. They're going to have an understanding about how it works out there.
In an interest to learn more about that understanding, I was on a mentored turkey hunt just this past weekend, and I swear the person I was hunting with had more questions about plant communities and about tree communities than anything about the turkey that were literally in the field, a couple hundred yards away that we were trying to put a play on. It's this, inherent interest that the more you're out there, the more questions you have, and it just really even fosters and kind of creates this further respect for the natural world and the processes that lead to native plant communities popping up here. Well, that's going to force other animals to browse more here, and this unique interaction is quite special. And I think hunting, not only do hunters have a deep respect for it already, but the process of hunting kind of fosters that interest even a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it goes back to like the old saying of with great power comes great responsibility. With knowledge comes appreciation. So the more you're out there and the more you see things, the more you can recognize when something special is happening.
Sure.
I think about my buddy was just scuba diving down in Florida and he saw a flounder, and he's gone on 200 dives and he's never seen a flounder before. And he showed someone who was in the party with him, pointed at it, and the guy just gave it like a thumbs up, like, "Oh, cool, man." But my buddy's like, "You don't understand. You don't see flounder like that. That's a once in a 200 dive trip to go see a flounder." So those types of things happen out in the woods all the time. Like you might see like I saw a flying squirrel a couple years ago, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. When I was walking around at night, I had one almost land on my head on a tree next to me. But so it's those type of things that you kind of pick up on too. Like when special events are happening, you can key on those and understand that's actually a rare occurrence to see something like that.
All right, so what makes a responsible hunter? We can boil a lot of this down to one word, ethics, but it takes a lot. There's many aspects that goes into it. You not only have to know and practice conservation, you've got to know and practice the regulations. You've also got to ensure the safety of yourself and others in the woods. You got to care for wildlife, take full responsibility of your actions. All of these basically amount to hunter ethics. And this is another thing that we really harp on in our workshops, that ethics are some of the decisions that go beyond regulations that really make you a responsible steward of the natural world. And we like to think of every hunter, every trapper that ever goes out into the woods or fields, they're a representative for every other hunter in the whole state, in the whole country. So make sure that the actions, everything that you're doing, is stuff that you would do with your grandpa watching you, or with a CO watching you. Fill in the blanks, put it there. But basically, you need to go above and beyond to ensure that your actions are not negatively impacting nature beyond your hunt. Fred Bear used to say, don't step on something you can step over. It's a simple little thing, but it's something that hunters, once they really develop that appreciation for the natural resources, they're doing that. So they're walking through the woods, but they're also appreciating the flowers. They're stepping around them. They're looking at the trees, like Dan said, and maybe flounders. We need a little bit more rain for flounders Middle Fork, Jason, but maybe by fall.
I mean, that would be a rare event if you saw a flounder out.
Absolutely.
I would certainly tell my friends. I would try to catch it. I don't think there's laws against it, right?
I don't think so.
Have to look on that. But anyway, let's talk about food. So this is one of the primary drivers. We know it is the getting food. We've all been to the grocery store. We see the prices going up, 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 up. We're also being told all the time that all the food in the grocery store is bad for us anyway. Well, what the heck are we supposed to do? Eat dirt and sunlight? We can't. We're not plants. So we got to eat something. Wildlife can help fill that void, okay? It's something that's local. It's something that's not getting fed all the crazy things that you might be worried that agricultural animals are getting fed or getting exposed to. It's a much more natural, free range, and ecologically low impact way to obtain your nutrition is wild game. And not only is it good at all that, and cutting out all those, whatever pesticides, insecticides, and different chemicals that agricultural meat might have, but it's also really, really good. And for people like me, I grew up eating wild game. To me, like, I've never sensed anything gamey with wild game. It's always agricultural meat. I feel like I can taste the feedlot. I just always have, and it's because I grew up with wild game. And then, here's a ham. Like, oh, is this bad? No, it's just what it smells like. I'm very sensitive to that, I guess, where you can get nose blind if that's all you've encountered. And still to this day, pork, beef, like, it always smells a little off to me, and I feel like I can taste it a little bit. And quite honestly, I prefer the wild game. If I can fill my freezer, so that's what I eat all year, that's what I'm going to try to do. That's super hard to do, but just look at all these cuts of meat on a deer. If you do go out and get successful on one deer hunt, which is not, I'm not saying it's easy. Okay. I did not shoot a deer last year, to be honest. So it's not easy, but one deer can keep you in a lot of meat for a long time. So I had to shoot a whole lot of squirrels to equal a deer, but I think I got close.
And just to kind of expand on that a little bit, my wife and I made kind of a conscious decision about 4 years ago to substantially reduce our reliance on, these quote unquote traditional food systems. And the first couple of years I found to be a little bit easier. I obviously had more time to hunt, especially during COVID, everything was kind of shut down. But, realistically for us, we don't have any kids at this moment. So 2 to 3 deer in the freezer can really replace the vast majority of our beef consumption. Occasionally, if you want to have a good burger, venison burgers, in my opinion, aren't as appealing. They're a little bit dry. You have to add a lot of fat to it to get it to kind of, make a good burger patty. But you can do a lot with wild game that most people, I think, are intimidated by wild game. They hear that it's so good that, oh, I don't want to just cook it wrong. I can tell you from experience, some of my favorite meals are just replacing venison with whatever beef I would normally use, even down to hamburger helper. I've eaten a lot of hamburger helper with venison over the years, and it's a great way to use up some of that ground with a lean meat that's going to taste, in my opinion, better. So you don't have to, experiment with all these really high-end recipes that you may see some of these hunting shows promote, where you're hearing ingredients that you've never literally heard of nor seen at the store. You can replace a lot of your normal protein consumption in recipes just by supplementing it with wild game.
Sure, I love the squirrel burger helper. Bring
Yeah,
it seconds, man. I tell you, like the lean meat goes good with all that cheese. You couldn't even tell if
absolutely.
it was deer or beef most of the time. So
And just to kind of expand it and kind of illustrate how lean a lot of this meat is, we kind of put up this illustration that compares about a 3 ounce serving. So for most of us, that is a little bit on the low side, but that's kind of the standard recommendation from dietitians. But you can see there is a lot more protein and a lot less fat in white-tailed deer compared to your standard cattle beef. Big difference, and I think a lot of that gaminess that Curtis kind of mentioned, that some people get kind of turned off by wild game. In reality, that's a lot of what meat tastes like. And again, it's not necessarily this gaminess, it's just a distinct different flavor than you're used to. And a lot of that is because traditionally, the vast majority of the flavor in beef is coming from the fat. And deer just do not have the level of fat that cows do. They're very active. They're eating a kind of a low caloric diet, and they're burning off a lot of the energy that they store. They may put on a substantial amount of fat for the fall or for the winter, but by the time the summer comes around, that's all burned through, and they're back to eating a very low caloric diet. Also, pheasant is a great replacement for chicken. A little bit more tough to come by, since pheasant populations aren't as booming as they once were in Illinois, but they are an excellent replacement for chicken. Very low in fat, fairly similar in the amount of protein that's in there. But again, that fat reduction, I think, adds so much flavor to pheasant. And pheasant is arguably one of my favorite wild game that's kind of commonly found in Illinois. I find pheasant to be absolutely delicious, whether you're doing it in stir fry. My wife and I have started to use it quite a bit in different Asian dishes, so ramen as well works quite well. And then obviously, if you want to deep fry it to add a little bit more fat back into it, that's all good too. But I'll let Curtis tell us a little bit about duck.
oh, duck's, yeah, one of my favorites. It's its own special kind of meat. So, like, if you think you've tried all the different kinds of meat, if you haven't tried duck, you have not, because it's something in between. I mean, it's a dark meat, so it's like beef, but it doesn't taste like beef. It's rich, and ducks, especially puddle ducks, if you get a fat duck, got a good amount of fat under its skin, and you can breast that out, keep the skin on, keep the fat on, make little cuts in the skin, and sear that fat side down for a little bit, only just like medium rare. Flip it over real quick. Oh, it's like a ribeye steak, but it's duck, and I'm comparing it to a ribeye steak because it's like soft and it's very succulent, and it's a little bit fatty and it's yummy, but it's a completely different texture, different taste, and one of my favorites. And you can see right there, a lot of protein, not a whole lot of fat in the mallards that you get wild. Again, they live a harder life than the domestic ones, but if you do get a fat one, leave that fat in the skin on, because
You bet.
you're gonna make some friends when you cook that bad boy up. I tell you that.
And if you're a person that likes to experiment with a very kind of savory as well as sweet dish, duck is about the best protein I have found for that. Duck pairs really well with different fruit type jellies or fruit toppings, or any kind of sauce you want to make, any reduction with kind of a fruity flavor, just goes absolutely amazing with duck.
Oh yeah, just pick, I mean, cranberry, blueberry,
Hmm.
mango, any of those, mandarin orange, just go down the line. Any of those you make a sauce with and put it over duck, you're gonna be happy.
Absolutely. And one of the cool things about wild game is if you pair it with I also like to garden, so I have a fairly big vegetable garden. And there is something truly special about being able to consume a meal that is virtually entirely at your hands. You were a part of the harvesting process of the game animal. You did all the processing, you did all the preparation. Plus now you're pairing it with side dishes and different things from the garden. There's just kind of something really special about that. So always like to highlight that.
For sure. A 3 ounce serving, they got to bump that
Yeah,
up.
they got to bump that up substantially.
no.
But we have a quick video from a previous participant that we think kind of illustrates this topic a little bit. Oop, accidentally muted myself. So we're going to play this short little 2-minute video here. So thank you to Kari.
Actually a lifelong gardener. I've grown a lot of my vegetables, canned tomatoes, grow eggplant, and this is just sort of like the natural step in that sort of food culture that I want to be a part of. I remember, like, it was about 10 years ago, I was cooking a chicken that I bought, from the supermarket, and there was just something so artificial about it, compared to especially what I know now, but it just made me not want to cook with meat that I got from the supermarket. It made me want to harvest it on my own.
Awesome. Monster studying it, but I've got the weird thing right there. Great.
Well, I've heard a couple different things about this. Like, some people, it's just like an event, it's like an outing to do with friends, and then for some people, they call it a lifestyle. It's not just, going out into the woods and, harvesting your meat, but, it's really getting to know, like, like an animal's behavior, culture in the woods, like, the changes of seasons, just like you were showing us, like the deer rubs, like how deer travel, where they bed down, and that's what it means to me. I really like, it sounds cliche, but getting in touch with nature, but it really is, and it's wonderful. More people should do it, and I'll put it this way, like, I grow raspberries at home, and someone came over once and they saw, it's like they grow on a bush, and it just never even occurred to them to ask, like, how raspberries, came to be, other than like the Driscoll box you see at the supermarket. So I like knowing where my food comes from.
Well said, Kari. And I kind of want to touch on something she kind of
Actually,
mentioned at the end there, but it's so much more than just getting this wholesome and lean protein, but it's also becoming a part of the process. And for humans, it's a relatively new experience that we don't need to rely on ourselves to provide sustenance for ourselves. That's a very new concept in terms of the human existence, especially with we're starting to see these more global food systems, and we saw the impacts of that when COVID happened. And so being able to provide and becoming a part of that food process, I think is quite special. Anything to add on to that, Curtis or Jason?
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, Kari did a excellent job describing that. Good video.
Cool. Well, we'll kind of jump into this next topic, which is a little bit more technical, but you can really reduce your CO2 emissions and your quote unquote carbon footprint through hunting. And so what I did with this study a few years back is I basically took the total deer harvest for that state and created what we considered an estimated weight of total edible venison. So this was hide removed, this was organs removed, this was bones removed, this was just that edible venison yield from kind of the total statewide deer harvest. And you can see in 2016, 2017, that was about 8.5 million pounds, which is quite substantial in terms of overall production. And a part of the study, we also asked about 3,000 hunters to kind of track their driving efforts, both for scouting as well as for hunting, as well as for processing and all these different activities. So we could kind of come up with a baseline estimate of the carbon footprint of your standard Illinois deer hunter. And using that, we were kind of able to extrapolate and have this kind of unique direct comparison between beef and deer, and look at what the total carbon footprint is of each of these at that kind of 8.5 million pounds or so. And you can see with beef, it's about 159,000 tons of CO2e, which CO2e, if you're unfamiliar, is CO2 equivalents. And so this is not just CO2 emissions, but it also takes into account some of the other greenhouse gases like methane and some of these other things. So it's kind of a standardized unit of measure for that. But you can see there's a pretty drastic difference between the carbon output for beef compared to deer if you're looking at 8.5 million pounds. And if you think about it, it makes sense. There's a lot of steps between that cow being born until it's at your local grocery store. There's a lot of storage, there's a lot of refrigeration and freezing processes that need to take in effect, as well as the feeding and all this. And so it's kind of a unique way that we can also reduce our own individual carbon footprint through hunting. And you can see that is quite substantial when you think about it in terms of the total deer harvest for the state. And especially if you were to extrapolate this out nationwide, I think it would even be a little bit more impactful.
Yeah, I think it's also important to think just the differences of what the animals eat, because you are what you
Absolutely.
eat, and so look at what agricultural beef eats. I'm not saying it's horrible, but it's a lot of corn that's stored a long time. There can be molds and mildews, a lot of issues with corn. We know deer are eating a little bit of everything out on the landscape. They're eating natural plants. Yeah, they're eating some corn, but they're supplementing that with a whole lot of other stuff. And I don't know, I'm not a dietitian. Obviously, I think 3 ounces is way too little of a steak, but I would think that it would be preferable to me to eat the animal that's eating a whole lot of different stuff, not just one thing. But that's just me.
Sure. And again, we're not trying to push you away from, complete meat production and no longer buying any meat from the grocery store. That's not at all what we're trying to do. But what we're trying to do is just kind of illustrate that just through hunting, it has all of these tertiary benefits, not only to, the environment, to the habitat, to the wildlife, but also to yourself. So I think that that's really what we're trying to do here is not push you away from, purchasing meat at the grocery store, but really just showing some of these tertiary benefits that a lot of people don't necessarily think about when they think about hunting.
Yeah, I saw a diet analysis that showed how people who get their own meat from hunting have a lower carbon footprint than vegans, because obviously in a temperate climate, when you're buying beans and peas and sprouts from in the wintertime, it's usually not grown locally. So there's transportation and all that adds up. So probably supplementing your diet with meat from hunting is one of the best ways to lower your carbon footprint that you can possibly think of.
Sure. And even if it takes you, 2 hours to drive to a site, and maybe you do that 5 or 6 times, that is still a drastic reduction compared to the amount of shipping, the transport, the growing out of that animal, the refrigeration, the freezing. There's a lot of steps in that process. So just, a couple trips that may take you 2 hours or so isn't, in terms of the grand scheme of things, isn't really that influential. But one thing I do want to talk about, we've kind of hinted quite a bit and discussed quite a bit the importance of wild game, but there are all these other utilization of the resource from harvested game that I think get often overlooked, especially on the fur side. And fur is something that can be used very commonly in paintbrushes, in makeup brushes, but also warmth. If you were to build out a fur coat from something that you harvested, first of all, it's going to be extremely sustainable. If you look at me, I'm wearing all these, it's kind of this new material, this lightweight kind of fishing style shirt. This thing is probably full of different plastics and different other synthetics that, when broken down, is just going to add more, microplastics into the environment, like we're seeing, through a lot of the research coming out of some of the climate agencies. And so it's really interesting to think about utilizing some of these more natural products that, in terms of insulation, are going to be vastly superior, in terms of longevity are going to be vastly superior, and they also have a little bit of this cool factor. It's something that, again, you're getting this kind of personal benefit from, hey, I have these gloves or these moccasins or this coat or this hat. I was a part of the harvest of this animal. That is my doing. And it's, again, just becoming a part of that process. And I know Curtis talks about this quite a bit in some of his trapping workshops, but there's this whole concept of utilization of fur, that people value utilizing the meat over utilization of the fur. And I think that's kind of the incorrect way to think about it, and think about utilizing the fur in addition to utilizing the meat from these animals. There's a great deal to be done, whether it's decor or whether it's just simply, getting a garment made and passing it down from generation to generation. It's going to last a long time, and it's got a little bit of a cool story to it.
I gotta say, most people never think about the brushes, You know, they think maybe, oh well, I've got nothing fur in my house. You know, I'm not Jennifer Lopez or CeeLo Green or whatever, but you probably do. If you've got makeup brushes or if you've got high quality paint brushes, they're probably made with sable fur or something similar, but those are real fur. And I've even, when I was in Wisconsin doing fur schools and stuff like that, we even encountered somebody who was vegan and actually stopped being vegan because they were a professional artist and they could not find any paintbrush that wasn't real fur that could make quality art that they wanted to put their mind on or put their name on. So basically they said, well, if I need this to do my art, then I'm not vegan. And that's what changed them. So yeah, even places you don't expect it, you'll wind up finding resources from animals. New car smell,
Absolutely.
that comes from a beaver. You know that?
Absolutely. And you know, it even goes outside of just, you know, fur. You know, myself, I'm a big angler too. I like to do a lot of crappie fishing, a lot of catfishing, a lot of trout fishing, although unfortunately in Illinois we don't have, you know, a ton of opportunities for trout fishing. But you can utilize a lot of these furs as well as feathers in making your own lures. I've started to dive into using different bird feathers to make crappie jigs, and I have found them to be almost superior to some of the plastic jigs that you may have to buy from the store. I can make them in you know, just a few minutes. I can really detail them. You can even dye the feathers so you can get that exact coloration you want. But you can also kind of utilize the feathers to create different action on the lure, especially with some of these, you know, like a mallard, for instance, has this really cool kind of curly Q feather right at the top of its tail, right on its rump. Those make excellent crappie jigs. If you think of a lot of the crappie jigs, they're kind of this little, you know, tail there at the end that just kind of flaps around and causes it to, you know, kind of move through the water column a little bit. And you can accomplish a lot of those same activities utilizing different furs and different feathers. Also makes for cool decor.
Yeah, so relaxation and nature immersion. So whenever I think of this, I think back to when I worked in Alaska, right? My first time, just a simple, you know, hunter from Missouri. All of a sudden, I'm in Alaska, a place I've dreamed of my whole life, and we're out in the woods, right? We're in Anchorage, so we're not like way out in the bush at this point. We're still in Anchorage, but we go out into the bush. You know, we see a moose, seeing some cool stuff, and then all of a sudden. I see a whole bunch of people dressed in bright orange start to slowly walk through the woods. Like, what in the heck? Are they deer hunting? Are they moose hunting? What's going on? It was monks, Tibetan monks. And we've seen a ton of them. And they come to Alaska because they revere wild places and they come there to forest bathe. And they come there just to immerse themselves in the forest, to be around the animals. And according to them, it has healing properties that we can't even begin to measure with you know, the instruments of today. So who the heck am I to say that they don't know what they're talking about? They seem to be having a good time. And I tell you, it was strange the first time I saw it. So I'm like, what in the world? You know, what's that, Charlie Brown? No, it's a Tibetan monk wearing a bright orange. And they all wear these bright orange. I don't know if that's just for visibility or if that's something religious to them, but there were tons of them in Alaska, and they were all forest bathing, and it was because they basically felt that it gave you some sort of healing or divine energy that you couldn't get elsewhere. And pretty cool stuff. You know, I'm not telling you that that's right or wrong, but I am telling you that for some reason being out in the woods is really good for your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. So just take out the fact that you're walking around and getting exercise, which we know is good. Just think about breathing the fresh air. Think about, you know, touching all the trees and the ground. You hear a lot of people talk about grounding now and electron exchange between yourself and the ground. And this is something that hunters do all the time. We're always going outside and sitting in the dirt and playing in the dirt and laying down in the dirt and all that other kind of stuff that a lot of adults, once they get, you know, they're over 18, they're wearing a suit and tie, they may never touch the dirt for the rest of their life. And that's probably not good. So we think it's good to go out and get dirty, whether you're forest bathing, it's grounding, or just getting some sunlight, some good old vitamin D. We're all stuck inside all the time. We got blue lights from all these things coming at our face. just getting out there, looking at some things in the distance and getting some good old-fashioned sunlight. Something about all those things coming together in a big old pot and stirring it up, and you take a sip of it and you just feel better. So I don't have the science behind it, and I don't even know if we as a species have the science behind most of these things. But if you try it, I promise you, after a while, you'll start thinking the same way that I do, and the same way that those Tibetan monks do, and you'll be traveling out of your way to just immerse yourself in nature, even if you have no chance of having a successful hunt, making a harvest. That's only one part of the story. Those monks weren't even hunting; they were just there to hang out in the forest, and they were having a great time doing it. We can do the same thing.
Absolutely. And I think one of the to me, one of the biggest benefits of hunting is you're going to develop a extremely deep understanding of wildlife behavior and ecology. We as hunters, it's almost a must to have this as kind of one of the biggest pieces, one of the biggest tools we have in our quote unquote hunter's arsenal is having this deep understanding of behavior, and also understanding kind of that seasonal behavior, how they're interacting with the weather, how they're interacting with different weather changes, as well as habitat changes. All these different things is knowledge that we just continue to build and foster over time. And we as hunters get to a point where we can start to really assess and kind of predict animal movement just by looking at what the landscape tells us, and developing this deep understanding is something that will never go away as you're a hunter. It's something that you're continually learning out there. Every wild creature that you encounter is going to act a little bit different than the one before it. And so hunting just provides you this unique ability to be able to see things that most others don't. And so much of that is because, again, we're trying to be out there and be undetected. And so you're getting to see what this wildlife is doing in their kind of natural environment, in their natural habitat, without any human interaction around. And there really is something special. I know Jason kind of mentioned it early on, that you see things that no other human is probably going to see. He was out there and had a flying squirrel land on his head. Very few Americans are going to get to experience an interaction like that. Most Americans probably don't even know flying squirrel is a creature. The next kind of cut is how many of them have actually seen one, and then the next cut is how many of them have had this cool story and this cool interaction that Jason said when he told the story. It was 4 or 5 years ago, and he still remembers it to this day. And so just being out there in the environment, in the natural world, and interacting and being able to watch this wildlife, and you start to develop a very deep understanding and a very deep connection with wildlife. And I also want to emphasize that it's not just game animals that we're enjoying and that we're able to see out there. So these are all photos I've taken, at various stages of my hunting career of different wildlife that I see when I'm out there. Especially in a duck marsh, you're going to see a lot of bald eagles. That's something that when I was a kid, bald eagles were so low in terms of population numbers that when you saw one, it was kind of the talk of the town. It was something you may see once in your life. Now, every time I drive to a local hunting spot, I pass a big eagle's nest. I was just on a mentored hunt this weekend, and we drove by, and there was two. The male and female were both at the nest. I assume they probably have a clutch of eggs in there. And so you're really getting to see kind of this unique depiction of wildlife that, again, most people don't get to see. And just to kind of expand on this a little bit, I want to talk about this concept of kind of hearing and enjoying the woods waking up, especially this time of year during, kind of the spring turkey season. Being out in the woods before the sun comes up it really is special. You're hearing bird songs that you've probably never really heard before or never listened to. We're starting to see this big influx of the migration from a lot of our passerine birds. So there's a lot of warblers and other species that are quite prominent in the woods right now. And just hearing the woods naturally wake up is something, very, I don't know. I'm not a very religious person in nature, but there is something very religious and almost spiritual about hearing the woods wake up.
I got to throw out the birds are migrating big time right now. So if you do enjoy birds, grab your binoculars and look up, because the tanagers, the grosbeaks, the indigo buntings, all the warblers really moving. In fact, they distracted me in my window a couple times already today, but that's a peak time. Keep your eyes open.
Absolutely. And I think we kind of mentioned this a little bit about developing this greater appreciation for native plant communities. You know, when I first started hunting, I didn't give two cares about what type of tree that was or what type of plant that was. But as you start to get more involved in hunting and start to do a lot more scouting and preparation and understanding wildlife behavior, you see knowing what species of tree that is actually important. So much so that we actually do a webinar where we spend 30 minutes or so in this webinar where we talk about the differences between a red oak and a white oak. So there are kind of two kind of groups of oak trees, but it's important to be able to identify what's a red oak versus what a white oak is because they have different preferences. Wildlife usually choose a white oak over a red oak because it's a little bit more of a palatable acorn. It has a higher caloric intake, but has a lower tannin content, which is what causes kind of a little bit of a bitter flavor. So in the red oaks, they're a little bit more bitter, but there are some times where wildlife will actually prefer those red oak species of oaks because they actually take 2 years to mature a single acorn. They're producing acorns each year, but an individual acorn takes 2 full growing seasons to fully mature before it turns into an acorn and falls on the ground. So in some years, you may have a drought that really impacts white oak acorn production. And well, if you've just always been in the same area because deer are always here and, early to mid-October feeding on the acorns, well, maybe they're starting to shift their patterns more towards red oaks. And being able to assess and understand these distinct behaviors is quite important. And even if you don't have a drought year, the white oaks are readily consumed. Again, they're most wildlife's favorite oak, so they're going to eat those acorns first. But because they have that slightly lower tannin acid content, they're also a lot more susceptible to rot. So they don't last very long on the forest floor. They either A, get consumed, or they B, just start kind of rotting away, or C, in the rare instance, they actually may germinate into a full oak tree. But those red oaks, again, they're not preferred. And so there's oftentimes later on in October and through November, you'll start to naturally see deer shift from feeding in heavy stands of white oak trees to starting to shift more to the red oak species of oaks as they feed on those red oak acorns. And so that's just kind of a quick example of the importance of understanding and having this appreciation for native plant communities and how they kind of interact between the two. One thing I also want to touch on is as a hunter, you really refine and develop kind of a search image. So I mentioned I was out on a mentored turkey hunt just this past weekend with an individual, and we had a couple turkeys pop in the field, and I spotted them right away. And he leant over to me several times. He said, "How in the world did you see that? How did you pick those out so quick?" Because at one point it was just a little head popped up about 150 yards away and then went down, and it was hard to see the bird for a few minutes after that. And you, as a hunter, will start to develop this, what I call a search image. You start to know what to look for. You start to look more for movement rather than trying to identify, oh, is that a deer? I'm just using what I call soft eyes. So my eyes are kind of relaxed. I'm looking for movement. And it's also a lot of looking for horizontal lines. There are a few horizontal lines in nature, but with wildlife, especially the back of a deer, the back of a turkey, those things stand out quite a bit. And so you start to, as a hunter, you train your eyes better to see more wildlife. And I hear from a lot of new hunters that, "Oh, I'm just not seeing anything." And while that may be the case sometimes, especially when I first started birding, I never saw birds, but it was because I didn't know where to look and I didn't know how to look. And so you really start to refine this kind of concept of a search image. But you also develop this kind of appreciation and really fine tune your hearing. As a turkey or a waterfowl hunter, we're very reliant on using game calls and being able to understand subtle differences between vocalization. Not only say, "Oh, that was a green-winged teal that flew by," or, "Oh, that was a gadwall that flew by," but more so, "Oh, that turkey is yelping a little bit more aggressive. That turkey is doing a lot of purring. That means he's content. Oh, that turkey just did a 2 cluck putt. Chances are it's going to bolt because it's freaked out about something." So being able to understand these differences is quite unique. And the more you hunt and the more just being out in nature, you start to develop this appreciation for the concept of being able to tell the differences, but also you'll retrain your ears a little bit to hear more for those. And I'm also a big proponent of hunting because it allows you to spend cherished time with people that are important to you. Hunting, in my opinion, is such an intimate activity, and being able to share that with somebody, whether it's just sharing wild game with them and opening their eyes to this whole new culinary experience that they've never had before, or taking somebody new out, or even just hunting with your best friend, with your spouse, with your kids, with your dad. I know when I started hunting, I hunted exclusively with my father. And my father passed away about 10 years ago. So I really have these cherished memories and these fond memories and experiences of spending that quality time out with him, before he passed. And there was actually a fairly large study, so much so that the Walt Disney Company actually became a supporter of this study, and actually funded a lot of the research into this, called the Nature of Americans. And it's this big survey and study that looks at how much time are people spending outdoors, what are their activities, what if we promote, more engaging activity outdoors. But they had a very, I think, kind of concise and prominent quote that I just kind of wanted to share in their final report of that study. And it was, when they talk about their most memorable moments in their special places outdoors, they nearly always involve other people. And I find that to be quite definitive and quite special, because I know for me personally, when I'm deer hunting, I'm usually solo. I'm one person. I don't have excuse me, I don't look back on my deer hunting memories like I do with waterfowl or with upland or even with turkey, because I like to turkey hunt with two people. I look back on those experiences a lot more fondly. I have more vivid memories of those experiences when I'm out there with other people. So much so that my wife and I have decided, when one of us draws a turkey tag, we both go. She was with me, for my second season hunt, and it was the first time she got to see a turkey, gobbling up close, and we could hear it spitting and drumming. And now we have this very unique memory that we will always be able to share with each other. And so I highly recommend, even if you don't have kids, look into hunting with friends and family. If you have a lot of non-hunting friends, maybe invite them along, share the experience with them, because I promise those memories are super special, and you will remember those experiences, in my opinion, a lot more in depth and intimately than you do on those kind of solo adventures. And we know, just being outdoors is extremely important for our mental well-being, as is these social relationships. We have decades of psychology research that shows this, that, having good social relations predicts mental and health well-being over time. There was a professor from Harvard, the university, professor of psychiatry, and he gave a pretty good quote too in one of his recent publications. Those who kept warm relationships got to live longer and happier, and the loners often died earlier. And so we've kind of talked about the health benefits of just being outside. We know that being outside is important for us as humans. It's how humans, in our whole experience, the vast majority of our time was outdoors. It's only, very recent in the human experience that has shifted. And now we're spending a lot more time indoors, even so much so that the importance of sunlight is starting to show up on our phones. If I don't know if you have a new iPhone, but mine automatically switches the screen to be more orange in the evening, because that simulates what the sun is naturally doing out there. And that, when I first had that realization, it was kind of terrifying to me that, man, we are so stuck indoors that we have to simulate something that we used to just naturally be a part of the process with. So I just want to really emphasize that spending valuable time with friends and family through hunting has been one of the biggest drivers of my life, and one of those that I really look back fondly on and really cherish those moments. But hunting can also challenge yourself. I think that for me, this is one of the driving forces that got me to become a big deer hunter, was the challenge of the hunt, the challenge of this animal, the pursuit of this animal. And I like to clarify that it's not just physically challenging, it's mentally challenging, it's emotionally challenging at times. There is little more mentally challenging than sitting in a tree stand for 12 hours, not being able to move much, having to worry about what the wind's doing, not being able to talk, and not seeing a single game animal. But we've all been there. That's part of hunting. There is nothing more mentally challenging than that. And so you're going to strengthen your mental resiliency. And you're also, what I have found is I'm able to control my emotions a lot more. When I first started hunting, I hate to say this, but I would oftentimes rush a shot opportunity. When a shot opportunity would come, I would be so excited and anticipated for that moment that I would let a lot of my mental preparation slide. Maybe I'd forget to look through a peep sight and I'd completely send the arrow, 5 yards over the top of the deer's back. Or what happened to me a lot of times, I wouldn't even get that shot opportunity because that deer would come in. Oh, it's coming on the trail. It's going to walk perfect. I stand up and just start getting ready immediately. And so you develop this kind of mental resilience as you hunt. But like we've mentioned, hunting is a very physical activity. And what I like to say is the more fit you are, chances are you're going to have a little bit more success, especially on public land. There was a study of Illinois hunters, I think it was back in 2005 or 2006, that kind of assessed how far the average Illinois hunter travels on public land. The vast majority of hunters don't go past about a quarter mile from their parking lot. And so just being fit enough to go that little extra, that little further distance, a lot of times you can kind of open up a whole plethora of different opportunities for yourself just by getting a little bit further away from that parking lot. But there's also physical obstructions. There's steepness of things. And remember, we're oftentimes carrying a heavy load while we're out there. And so in my opinion, there's not much better of an exercise than hunting. I had a buddy in college who played football for our college team, and he used to call it his redneck workout. He would always get in really good football shape just by getting geared up and getting prepared for the hunting season. Putting on a 40 to 50 pound pack. If you're going out west, that's what we're looking at. If you're putting a tree stand on your back, you may be looking at 20 to 25 pounds plus the 5 pounds of your equipment, plus your drinks, your snacks, all the other gear that's required. You're carrying a heavy load very oftentimes. And so it really does kind of promote this level of fitness. And it's also unique fitness. I used to run a lot. I don't so much anymore. I could run all day and not have too many issues. When I first started doing kind of a more backpack style public land hunting where I'm going in deep into the timber, I thought I was in shape. I learned very quick that being in running shape is not being in hiking through, over uneven terrain, through mud, through water, while carrying a heavy load. They're completely different. But it's a great way to promote being healthy and a little bit more fit through hunting. So I kind of talked a little bit about this, but I want to emphasize this kind of concept of training your mental resiliency through hunting. We've all heard the term buck fever, which is, you have a big buck come in and you're all excited. There will be emotions that take over your body. When people talk about buck fever, they're talking about shaking. And this is not something that's made up or artificial. It is very real. There is adrenaline that just starts immediately pumping through your body. And being able to control that is vastly important for a hunter, but it's also something you'll start to realize you can kind of tune back in on in your everyday life. Being able to drop that level of adrenaline, being able to slow your heart rate, control your breathing is crucially important, especially if you're in a position where you may have to deal with high anxiety, stressful type situations where you might have that moment of panic. Being able to control yourself during those moments are critical, and hunting will give you a lot of opportunity to do that. But I do want to emphasize that for me, I don't get real buck fever. I get what I call just hunting fever. I don't care if it's a doe or if it's a spike that's still 150 yards away. The moment I see that first deer from the stand of that hunt, the shakes usually start for me. And I have to, again, try to slow my heart rate, control my breathing. So much so that even on this mentored hunt I was on last weekend, it was a turkey hunt. We had a tom. We were talking to him on the roost. He's gobbling his head off. And I leaned over and said, get ready. We're going to hear him fly down. And when he flies down, that's kind of when we know we're going to be in what I call go time. So be ready. We heard that bird fly down, and instantly, I wasn't even the one holding the gun. I was just there to call and to kind of help him out. He was the one that all the pressure was on, but my heart rate started pounding. I have one of these like fitness trackers, and I like to go back and look, and you can see a huge heart rate spike through my hunts. And normally that's because there's some kind of game in front of me. It's a primal instinct, and it's hard to control at first, but the more your time you spend out there, you'll start to be able to control that a little bit. And again, you can use a lot of this through your kind of everyday life. And I do want to emphasize that this doesn't all, especially the mental preparation, does not all go away the second you take that shot. For me, it even gets a little bit worse. That's when the adrenaline really takes over and my body starts to shake uncontrollably. But I have this unique kind of, I don't want to say unique, but this emotional connection and admiration for that animal, that it's also kind of a sad moment at the same time. You've developed this respect for this animal. We've talked about understanding the wildlife behavior. You have a profound connection to this species of wildlife that you're hunting, and there often is kind of an emotional reaction after that shot, and it's important to prepare yourself for that. But again, that's kind of training you in how to handle these situations in everyday life as well. So just to kind of wrap up with this concept of why hunt, because it's challenging, because some people enjoy the challenge. I know for me, that was when I first started hunting, that was really what drove me to deer hunt with archer equipment, was for this concept of the challenge. I wanted to try to outsmart the animal. I wanted to connect to these kind of primal instincts with me. There's a famous hunter who has a quote that goes something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me, but something along the lines of, I like to hunt hungry because it makes me a better hunter. And I really do feel that there is something ingrained in us as humans that, again, we've been hunting for generations and millennia. It's a relatively new experience that we don't have to provide for our own food. And being out there and hunting your own food, you will start to rekindle a lot of that kind of hidden connection with the land and with wildlife, and it's something quite special. But the challenge is oftentimes a lot of the enjoyment, especially if you want to try a different style of hunting. Maybe you've been deer hunting with a firearm your whole life. Well, now maybe I want to take it the next step and try archer equipment, where instead of having to get a deer within 200 yards of you, now you're trying to get a deer within 20 or 30 yards, which becomes a lot more challenging and a lot more difficult. But that's where, going back to this concept of understanding wildlife behavior, understanding plant communities and natural resources, can really benefit hunters. And that's why I think hunters are some of the biggest stewards and the biggest kind of convicted individuals about conservation, is because we have this very unique connection to the land and to the wildlife. I want to talk a little bit about some of the kind of economic benefits of hunting. Arguably, the biggest is going to be the driving force of funding in this country is by hunters. It's on the back of hunters, whether that's through permit sales, whether it's through license sales, whether it's through having to buy a federal migratory duck stamp or a state stamp. But there's also what we call the Pittman-Robertson, or the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act. And so this was introduced in Congress by two senators, one by the name of Pittman and one by the name of Robertson, in 1937 is when it finally passed. So kind of colloquially, you'll hear this referred to as the PR Act or the Pittman-Robertson Act. But it's a very unique model for how we fund conservation, and essentially it places an excise tax on hunting equipment. So whether it's firearms, whether it's ammunition, whether it's bows and arrows, there are very specific products in the hunting kind of equipment sphere that receive an excise tax. And the interesting thing is, this excise tax is actually placed at the manufacturer's level. And so this isn't, an additional sales tax that's run up at the point of purchase. It's already kind of pre-built into the price of that item. Now, I can assure you the manufacturers are passing that excise tax onto us, but it's kind of already built into that price. It's not, seeing an extra $50 be added to your total at the point of purchase. But the really cool thing is how this funding is allocated and how it's used. It's a very unique method, but when the two senators, Pittman and Robertson, introduced it into Congress in 1937, they saw the writing on the wall. They knew that over time, the Treasury Department and some of these other federal agencies are going to want a little bit of that money and start taking more and more each year. So what they did is they allocated this money directly to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So this money does not go to the Treasury Department. It does not go to the General Revenue Fund. It goes to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to allocate back to individual states to then use for wildlife habitat, wildlife restoration, wildlife research, acquiring new public lands, building shooting ranges, all of these different activities. But again, it cannot just be gobbled up and used for infrastructure or some of these other general revenue activities that a lot of funds get used for these days. But what's really cool is how they allocate these funds. So they kind of use a unique formula that looks at the total land size of the state in terms of acreage, but it also takes into account the number of hunting licenses sold in that particular year in that particular state. So as we have more hunters who are buying more equipment, they're buying more archer equipment, they're buying more guns, they're buying more ammunition. If they're also buying more licenses, we're seeing that total Pittman Robertson go up, but we're also seeing the individual state allocation go up by having more licensed hunters in the state. Now, the cool thing about these funds is they're used with state matching funds. So the federal agency is providing 75% of the funds for a specific project, and the state is coming up with a 25% match to fund these efforts. And we just kind of like to illustrate here on the left what some of these efforts have done. You can see in 1949, we had about 2,500 deer in Illinois. If you think, if you're kind of new to hunting or new to Illinois, you may think, oh, Illinois had deer forever. In reality, we didn't have an Illinois deer hunting season until the 50s and 60s. That was when the population started to rebound enough that there was actually a sustainable population that could be harvested. But I've talked to a lot of old timers who, growing up, if they saw a deer track, not just a deer track, it was a successful season for them. And for me, that's just mind blowing, because now you drive down the interstate and you're probably going to see 80 deer if you're driving at the right time of night and a 30 to 40 mile stretch. And so it's really incredible what these funds have done for wildlife and for wildlife conservation. Even wild turkey. In 1900, there was not a single wild turkey in the state of Illinois. They were completely extirpated, both from habitat loss, habitat fragmentation. So that's breaking up these big expanses of habitat into these little kind of localized island populations. That's kind of what we call fragmentation, to the point that we had 0 wild turkey left in Illinois. But through various efforts to increase habitat, but also to restock and repopulate these populations. So back in I think it was the 1940s and 50s, Illinois started to go to other states and say, hey, we need turkey. We want to get turkey back in Illinois. And there were some states that I think we traded otters for turkeys, and we would have this kind of wildlife exchange where they need some species to help some restocking and repopulation efforts, and we needed turkey. And so we started to bring in turkeys from outside the state to start to rebuild this population. And as this population started to regrow, then they would take individual birds from the localized Illinois population down in the Shawnee National Forest and begin to translocate them across the state to create kind of these new seeded populations that continue to expand and expand and expand over time. And now we have around 100,000 wild turkey in the state. So you can see just in about 50 years, a substantial amount of success just with a little bit of this funding and a lot of work from hunters and a lot of support from hunters. I also want to talk about waterfowl. Curtis talked quite a bit about this concept of market hunting. Waterfowl were one of the hardest hit kind of groups of species during this market hunting. There's old pictures from the late 1800s, early 1900s of people using these giant punt guns. So these are guns that instead of a shotgun shell, they would load the barrel with rocks, glass beads, virtually anything they could find that would propel forward, and they would just go up to flocks of waterfowl and just shoot that punt gun and basically take out an entire flock in one fell swoop. And again, this was before regulated hunting, and it virtually knocked back a lot of waterfowl populations, almost to the point of extinction. But you can see today now, there was just the 2022 survey from Ducks Unlimited, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the Canadian Fish and Wildlife Agency, which I'm blanking on their exact name at the moment. But they just launched their North American waterfowl breeding survey, which estimated the population right now at about 34 million. And so you can see, again, just in a couple years, about 100 years, we have seen this drastic increase from barely seeing any waterfowl to about 34 million. So it's quite substantial. And another big kind of driving force, particularly on the waterfowl side in terms of funding, is the migratory bird hunting and conservation stamp. And in my opinion, this is what I would consider one of the most successful pieces of wildlife legislation in this country, is the Migratory Bird Hunting and Conservation Treaty Act. It established this, what most people refer to as a duck stamp, but but it established this program where 98% of funds, and I have struggled to find other nonprofit or other programmatic efforts that have that kind of consistency in terms of how much money is actually being allocated to the program it says to. There is so little overhead in this program that 98% of those funds go directly back to one singular purpose: to restore and enhance waterfowl and to wetland areas. And it's been a really big boom, and that's what helped us see this growth from 1900 to today. Obviously, we had Pittman Robertson that's contributing funds to this, but we had this federal duck stamp, which was allocated to protect and enhance wetlands, and it generates a lot of funds. Every single waterfowl hunter in the country has to purchase one of these to be able to legally hunt waterfowl in this country. It's $25. The cool thing is they've started to switch to where you can now order them online. Historically, you had to go to a post office. So you're actually buying a migratory bird. You're buying your hunting stamp at the post office, which for me, I found to be quite cool. And I actually always went to a post office to buy it because there was always a look of confusion on the sales clerk's kind of eyes if they've never heard that question. Hey, I need to buy a duck stamp. They always have that like look of confusion. And then you get to explain the whole process and just kind of talk a little bit more about the importance of this program. But to date, it's generated well over $1 billion. And again, this was passed in 1934. And it's protected about 6,000 acres, a lot of them up in the Canadian prairie pothole region, which is the breeding ground for a lot of these species. And that's what's really unique about waterfowl is they're a migratory species. So we can't just manage them here in Illinois and say, that's good, we're done. We have to manage this species across the entire flyway. So all the way up from Canada, down to Mexico, down to Louisiana, Arkansas. It just kind of depends on the species. But there's a lot of really good habitat work being done on these kind of core flyways. And a lot of that is directed from funds through this migratory bird hunting and conservation stamp. And just a little bit more about the kind of economic benefits of hunting. This was a case study that the Human Dimensions Lab at the Illinois Natural History Survey conducted in 2012. And I just think this is one of the coolest little nuggets of information about hunting is, again, we're generating money for conservation, but we're also generating money for the local economy in a substantial amount. So 2,556 jobs were created just because of hunting, whether it's people staying at hotels, whether it's gas stations. There's a lot of rural areas that their entire economy relies on hunting season. I know I went to college in Western Kentucky near a place called Reelfoot Lake. Reelfoot Lake is kind of nationally known for its crappie fishing and its waterfowl hunting. And they've put out several press releases that say, hey, if we have a bad waterfowl season, we're going to start to see a lot of restaurants close, a lot of lodges close, a lot of gas stations close, because they rely on those dollars from people coming out of state or coming from more of the urban areas to support that local economy. And hunting really helps kind of bolster that. And I really like this little nugget here that every dollar spent waterfowl hunting generates about $1.86 to the local economy. So that's a pretty good return on investment there. And last but not least, finding adventure. I don't know how many, I kind of talked about, my let's say not my reliance, but my desire to hunt with other people and how important that is to my personal hunting kind of process and to who I am as a person. I really like to hunt with others, but there are some times, and that's why I like deer archery at times, because it allows you to get away from the hustle and just to push yourself as far and as hard as you can to get back into some of these areas that some people may have never seen. Now, unfortunately, in Illinois, we don't have a lot of areas that kind of remain unseen unless you get to the Shawnee National Forest and some of these bigger tracts of land. But even on some of these smaller parcels of land, the public land that I hunt exclusively is about 3,000 acres. But being able to adventure and push myself a little bit further back into that piece of property, whether I have to climb up a steep cliff, sometimes I have to cross a river, so I may even have to bring waders with me. It allows me to make cool stories, but also to get away from other people.
And I think when you think about it, the stories that happen hunting, these are the stories that make you who you are.
Absolutely.
So us, when we're talking, Dan, Jason, we're sitting there talking, about cool things that happen over the last year, it's almost always hunting trips. Sometimes they go good, sometimes they go bad, but altogether, those become the adventures that when somebody says, "Hey, what'd you do last year? What have you done since I've seen you last?" That's what you're going to talk about. And if you just sit on your couch day in and day out watching reruns, what do you say in that circumstance? Like, "Oh, I saw a good episode of Seinfeld." Like, okay, you and 6 million other people. Like, so I don't get it, but yeah, if you are the type of person that likes adventure, hunting is going to push you to do that, because just like Dan said, it's going to push you outside your comfort. Even, yeah, it's only 3,000 acres. You're not going to find some hidden cave with DB Cooper's treasure in it. Probably, who knows? Maybe if you do, give me a call. But it is going to push you off the trail and just off the places that common everyday hikers going to go, and just doing that is going to make you see some incredible stuff.
Absolutely. And we have one more kind of video we'd like to share before we kind of have a few more slides and then we wrap up. But this is a previous participant, done a few of our workshops, did a few mentored hunts with some of our staff. But this is Sierra. So I'll let you I'll let her tell you why.
I know I haven't harvested anything yet, but I did have a singular experience when I was hunting. I was trying to do a walk-in by myself. The hunt itself was not very successful. I probably wasn't going about it right. I wasn't hidden very well, so I'm pretty sure the ducks just saw me and just kept going. But you have to get there early for a walk-in. So this is like 5:15 in the morning, and I'm walking, and it's late in the season, so it's dark out. It's still very dark out. And the walk-in area that I chose was kind of a small, very small kind of pond. You could probably almost wade into the middle of it. I didn't, because I wasn't sure, but I had a little stick to make sure I didn't slip on a rock or something. And I was going out with my decoys, and there was these big trees, kind of like we have here in the back, and it was dark. And it occurred to me, I'd never been in a place this wild when it was this dark before. I've never been anywhere. Even if I've been to a park, it's been like in 3 p.m. or something. And it was so quiet, and it looks so different. Trees look so different in the dark. I don't think people realize that. And it was, I had to stop, and I'm not a particularly religious person, but it felt very religious. I didn't even set my decoys out. I just kind of waded into the point of the lake where I felt like I could stop, and I stopped, and I just kind of waited. And I probably sat there for a good 2 minutes and didn't move. And I just tried to take everything in. It was almost a little scary. You can't see the trees. You can't see what's in the trees. So it's almost like, anything out here you feel very vulnerable. But I think that vulnerability opens you up in a way that you're not going to get if you just go take a walk in the woods at 3 p.m. in the middle of the day on a manicured trail. I think that's the best experience I think I've had so far. I don't think I'm ever going to forget that. I can still see the trees and how dark they were, and it was, I don't know, it was almost like I was just slipping back into the landscape. I wasn't even really a person. I was just kind of hidden there. I know
Ain't tried that much since the last time I watched Space Jam. The original.
But I think that's such an important and kind of valuable lesson. And I know even, I myself at times, I really push myself for that harvest, but it's really important to take a step back and to, understand why you're out there. It's not always about chasing, a buck like this that you kind of see on the screen here. Sometimes it is just the simplest thing that can, bring you any joy, any amount of joy or happiness or a learning opportunity. And for me, hunting it's allowed me to expand my horizons further than I ever thought possible. Whether it's, trying to understand plant communities, or now I'm starting to really dive into foraging. And I would have never guessed when I first started hunting that I would have this deep appreciation for plants, so much so that now I want to learn the benefit of each plant, to the point that, oh, can I use that as an antibiotic, or can I eat that? How can I prepare that? It really is just kind of taking a step back from the bigger picture and realizing that it's not just all about the harvest. Kind of success is dictated by what you want to get out of a specific hunt. And for a lot of times it's just taking this thing, turning it off, not checking it for 4 or 5 hours, and just getting, like she said, absorbed in the landscape. I think she said that perfectly.
Yeah, I love how she said that, just like she was basically being absorbed back in the landscape, because it really reminds me of something that I think about a lot hunting too. And that's how I feel like with non-hunters, they separate humans from everything else in the natural world. So it's like the natural world and humans, like we're these two separate bubbles that don't interact or whatever. And like she said, hunting teaches you that you are a part of the living ecosystem. We're in tune, we're in plug, everything is connected. And when you're out there, you're plugged into it in a more meaningful way than if you're not hunting. And it helps you develop that understanding and that appreciation that we are all connected. And just because we have a little bit of a well-developed white and gray matter, 3 feet above our belly button, that doesn't mean that we're somehow separated from the natural world and the animals. We're all still intertwined, and what one does affects the others. And we just so happen to think that regulated hunting and conservation funded through that is the best way to keep that in perpetuity. So yeah, she did awesome. Sierra, I think she, in a past life, she must have been a movie actress or something.
Yeah, it sounds. I mean, those comments were so thought out. You'd almost think that's scripted, but that was true from the heart. Just her answering
Oh,
a
yeah.
simple question.
From the hip. She didn't even
Yeah.
know that question was coming. It was a real experience. It just poured out of her. So really cool. And yeah, it really does bring a tear to my eye, because it's just, she's someone, she hasn't even harvested an animal
Right.
yet, but that was a story that is one of her defining moments. And that's just really special, because that's something a lot of people this day and age, they miss out on for their whole life. But we at Illinois Learn to Hunt, we're here to tell you it's never too late. Come and pay us a visit. I don't care if you're 95 years old, so you might be a little bit limited, but we'll teach you some ways to get involved in the outdoors. It's never too late.
Absolutely. Well said. And just to kind of close out, we want to give a quick reminder that if you did submit an application for the 2023-2024 Illinois Deer Firearm or Muzzleloader Permit application, the first lottery results are in. So you can go to your exploremoreillinois.com account, check that out, see if you got drawn. Hopefully you did. If you did not draw a permit, the second lottery is now open, so you can go ahead and submit a separate application. Now, during the second lottery, it's also open to non-residents. So if you're watching this and you're from Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, we've had a few viewers from Canada historically, so maybe they'll take us up on that and apply. But the second lottery is now open.
Yep. Speaking of not being too late, not too late for that either.
Absolutely.
So still hop in.
And the good thing, I always do want to kind of mention this too, because we get a lot of people. I'll kind of go back for a second. We get a lot of people, I didn't draw a firearm tag. I didn't draw. In reality, I didn't draw a firearm deer tag for about 3 years. And again, I exclusively hunt public land. Curtis is the same way. Jason is the same way. We like having these big expanses of pieces of property, but that often means you're, dealing with competition from other hunters. They want to be out there just as much as you. And like we mentioned during the North American model of wildlife conservation, it's a democratic activity. Hunting is democracy. Everyone has the opportunity. But what I do want to say is don't forget about archery hunting, especially with new regulations that passed in it's been so long now, I can't remember, 2019, 2018, somewhere around there, with crossbows. Crossbows are an excellent way to get out there during archery season without having to develop the proficiency with a standard vertical bow, whether it's a compound or a more traditional, like a long or a recurve, that oftentimes takes a year or two to really get competent with, to the point that you feel comfortable shooting at a live animal with that equipment. Crossbows are a little bit more user friendly, especially if you've historically shot firearms. It's going to feel very natural and very similar to you. It's got a stock that's going in your shoulder. You're using a trigger. Oftentimes you're using a telescopic scope that is giving you a level of magnification. And I want to just emphasize that with archer equipment, you're getting 4 months to deer hunt. With a firearm, you may get 5 days. maybe if you're lucky. And so you're really expanding your horizon there, increasing your amount of opportunity to spend time out there and to get access. And I also do want to mention last deer season was actually the first year that we saw on a statewide level that crossbows went went higher than compound or vertical bows. Historically, it's been very dominated by vertical bows. We've seen crossbows become a higher percentage of what people use year over year. And finally, this past year, we saw that inflection point where now crossbows are the most utilized type of bow out there. So pretty cool stuff. So if you didn't draw a permit, it's not the end of the world. If deer is still something you're interested in, check out crossbows. And if you need more information, we're happy to help out. We'll probably be launching our Learn to Hunt Deer workshops this summer. So be on the lookout for those. We'll have a lot of those to get you geared up, get you ready, and get you learning what all you need to learn.
A lot of archery events too. They're not
Absolutely.
necessarily going to be crossbow events, so that does take a different target. But we are going to have some simulated 3D shoots that'll be hitting our schedule here in the next few weeks. So be watching for those if you do like to shoot a vertical bow. A lot of fun. Come on out. We got a new type of 3D shoot that really tries to simulate hunting with deductions. If you hit the target, but you don't hit within the vital area, and unknown yardage and a few surprises in there. So a lot of fun. Definitely check those out this summer if you're the type that likes to fling some arrows.
Absolutely. And to stay up to date on all these, cool activities that we have coming down the pipeline, we're going to have a busy spring or busy spring. We're in spring, a busy summer and a very busy fall. We've got a lot of cool events coming up. I would like to mention, keep the date September 23rd in mind if you're interested in looking for mentored hunting opportunities. We have a big event. This will be our second year doing it. We call Illinois Hunt Camp. And essentially, it's just a fun social evening. We're going to have different activities, different games, different educational booths and opportunities. Last year, we had a dog demo. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was there. Fur Takers of America, Pheasants Forever, NWTF. All the big groups were there hosting educational booths. But the big draw is we're going to be giving away a lot of mentored hunts. And so throughout this spring and summer, we're connecting with a lot of our mentors and trying to say, hey, will you donate maybe a pheasant hunt to where you'll take 2 or 3 new hunters out on a pheasant hunt. And so those will be given away throughout the evening at that event. So if that's something you're interested in, keep an eye out for that. It will be likely near kind of the western portion of Chicago is kind of where we're targeting right now. Worked with a few venues that we're trying to solidify some details to, but it will be kind of in the Chicagoland area for lack of a better term.
Yeah, details should be coming really soon. Hopefully.
Really soon.
So be watching for that. Hunt Camp is the one that nobody wants to miss. As a lot of people won stuff last year. Everybody had a great time. Just it's kind of replaces some of that lost social capital.
Sure.
Hunt camps of old or the deer check stations that people are always groaning about. Bring them back. Well, not really brought it back, but this is kind of something to replace it. And it's a time to get together. Forget about the differences between the upland hunters and the deer hunters and the turkey hunters, and just all come together and have fun, sharing experiences, sharing knowledge, sharing stories. And we're going to have some good food and a lot of fun along the way. So you definitely don't want to miss Hunt Camp. That's top of the list, but watch for all of our stuff. We're going to have all kinds of fun stuff coming.
Absolutely. And you come to Hunt Camp, you may even walk away with a free gun too.
Yeah, Jacob Ginsburg, one of our, he also won a mentored squirrel hunt. He won a gun that he could bring to the squirrel hunt. That worked out perfect.
It worked out about as good as it could, yeah.
No, that was really good. So, yeah, you just never know. But Hunt Camp, a lot of fun. And like Dan said, most of the biggest names of conservation and wildlife in Illinois are partners. And we're adding partners all the time. So, whatever you're interested in, there's going to be something for you, no doubt.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us today. This was a little different than our normal kind of technical webinars where we really dive into kind of the strategy of things, but we just kind of wanted to, do something like this in the off season and try to, generate a little bit more interest, but really explain why hunting is still relevant to modern society. So we hope you enjoyed this. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck in the woods.